host.
Morning and welcome to Ghana Shot. As you can see, I have with me Dr. John Helmer and Brig Arun Sahgal, and we're going to talk of very interesting things today. We're going to talk of the peace talks which happened in Abu Dhabi. We're going to talk of what's happening in Greenland and get a hang of what Trump is up to there and how things are going to pan out. And then we'll talk of the corridors which are opening up, whether it's the IMEC, the International North-South Corridor, or the Trans-Arctic Corridor. 3 topics, and let's see how it goes. We're going to get different viewpoints. We'll get the Indian viewpoint, we'll get the Russian viewpoint, and then we'll see what's the international viewpoint also on all this. Without much ado, I'd request Brigadier Arun Sahgal. Sir, please kick off on the peace talks in Abu Dhabi. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Now, this is what I have pieced together about the peace talks. They were scheduled on January 23rd and 24th. And the most interesting part was that this is the first time all the 3 delegations were meeting face to face in a designated area, in this case, Abu Dhabi. The participation was from the Ukrainian side. There had the Secretary of National Security and Defense Council, Mr. Umarov. The Russian side was led by General Igor Kostrikov, the director of the GRU. My pronunciation may not be very good. And U.S. delegation, of course, had Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and once again, the Army Secretary was once again brought into the picture. So the goal was twofold. There were proposals which were ready for adoption regarding the security guarantees and economic issues. But the sticking point was the territorial dispute or the territorial issues, which remain a hurdle. As far as the territorial dispute is concerned, there were 2 red lines. The Donbas region. As far as Donbas region is concerned, the Russians are demanding that 20% of the Donbas, its still control, should be handed over. I mean, the 20% of the Donbas region, which they are not in physical control, should be given to the Russians. Zelensky has overruled that issue, but he is countered with his own proposal of a free trade zone in the east, but he is refusing to formally cede the sovereignty of the territory. The second issue is the NATO presence as part of the security guarantees. The Russians are absolutely against it, and that's a no-go as far as they are concerned. There will be no European peacekeepers. So when we go ahead, we will just look at it as to what the other positives or what other options are being looked at. As far as the Board of Peace Initiative is concerned, U.S. administration has decided to introduce the Board of Peace concept in these negotiations. The whole issue is, as of now, things stand is some European leaders, like Italian leader Meloni, they're favorably disposed towards this, but there are largely the Germans, the French, and even the British, who always sit on the fence, are not overly committed. They look at it as a concentration of power and undermining of the UN. So these are the aspects. The other issue is that, and the most interesting part of this is, while the peace talks were going on, there was equally a recent escalation in violence. On 23rd, 24th night, Russia launched massive airstrikes of 370 drones and 21 missiles. The whole idea was that to decapitate their gas systems and plunge the region into sub-zero temperatures, which have not been taken very kindly by both by the Europeans as well as the Ukrainians, of course. Then the issue comes. I've also done a bit of analysis. What happens if the field stocks fail? But I will stop here and let John uh, fill in with more details than I have on this issue.
John, over to you, your views.
Thank you, Arun, and thank you, Ravi, for the intro. Let me try to explain both what you can see that has happened and what you can't see because it's either missing or concealed. And both elements are important to understand. First, the idea of forming working groups to discuss security territorial issues, to discuss so-called humanitarian or prisoner exchange issues, and to discuss economic sanctions war issues. That's not new, and it didn't start the other day, last week in Abu Dhabi on Friday, Saturday. The idea of working groups was proposed on the Russian side more than 6 months ago and refused by both the American side and the Ukrainian side. Now we come to a working group that's principally a security territorial definition, military security discussion platform. The key person who was there on the American side, and this is visible, was General Alexis Grinkevich. Grinkevich, that's a Belarusian name, it's a Russian name. His parents his family comes from Belarus, but he's a senior US officer. He's the SACEUR, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, and he's the commander of the European Command in Europe. He's an F-16 fighter pilot. He's never fought in combat in the air. He's got a record of losing on the Ukrainian battlefield and losing on Syria. He was in charge of operational planning at the Pentagon from early 24 on, which means he missed the disastrous Ukrainian counteroffensive of 2023, but he was just in time to be part of the Kursk invasion, a disastrous move by the Ukrainians into Kursk region, which has cost them vast numbers of casualties and gained them nothing. So Grinkevich is there to match the two Russians. Igor Kostyakov is an admiral, Navy, but he's the head of Russian military intelligence. It's the first time that President Putin has put a senior intelligence officer with battle experience and intelligence experience at the negotiating table. Kostyakov was accompanied by General Alexander Fomin, and you can see them both together in the ceremonial photographs with the Emirati foreign minister, and you can see them at the table, the three-sided table later on. They're military experts, and they match Grinkevich. The U.S. Army Secretary, Daniel Driscoll, is there, but he's not, he has had military service. He's principally there introduced as the candidate to take over the Pentagon when Peter Hegseth will be replaced later this year. He's a protege of Vice President Vance, so he's there for the vice presidency. And he is, let's say, closer to the military security issues at the table than either Stephen Witkoff or Jared Kushner, or the person who's not visible but who was there, a man called Joshua Gruenbaum. All three are New York lawyer investment speculators. And they're not there to discuss and can't discuss the military security strategic issues. What's missing there is, on the Russian side, the Russian foreign ministry, the Russian foreign minister, and the business negotiator for the president, Kirill Dmitriev. He was in Abu Dhabi. He did meet with Witkoff and Kushner, as he had at the Kremlin earlier in the week. That's business, that's sanctions, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So this is a security discussion. And as Arun has indicated, there are a number of very clear Russian positions which are up for discussion. As best I can tell from the feedback from Abu Dhabi and also from the public display of in Moscow, there were no agreements reached on the key issues of the definition of the territorial settlement, the definition of security guarantees for Russian side, as well as for the so-called Ukrainian side. No definition of the future, let's say, demilitarization of the Ukraine and the role that NATO, the US, and others might play in the Ukraine after a settlement. No sign of the sides reaching an agreement on those major issues, although Witkoff has announced there's only one major issue still to be settled. This is bargaining tactics. There's no evidence that that's true. Okay, so what we have to do is understand on the Ukrainian side, the principle there was Kirill Budanov, the head of their military intelligence, and the man who's replaced Yermak as the president, the closest individual on the Ukrainian side representing Mr. Zelensky. Rustam Umerov is the nominal leader of the Ukrainian delegation, but he's a dual U.S.-Ukrainian citizen. He and his family live in Florida, down the road from President Trump. He is not the significant decision maker at that table. Now, one thing that you can see at the table, and I have published some photographs to show, is the insult the American side chose to inflict on everyone else. It was Friday in Abu Dhabi. The Americans chose to dress down Friday. They wore casual clothes. They wore open-necked shirts. They did not wear costumes comparable to the Emiratis, the Ukrainians, or the Russians. Why did the Americans do that? It was, in my view, and it's substantiated by others, a calculated insult to all sides. The Americans think they are not simply the mediators in this series of negotiations. They think they can dictate or are superior to the other sides in the negotiation. They think so. And coming from an open-shirted General Gringevich, who has lost every single major operation he's been in charge of on the battlefield, that's rich, to put it politely. And yet the American confidence is also, as you see, President Trump's confidence. And it's been enhanced by the nature of the negotiation that took place in the Kremlin for over 4 hours, a couple of nights before Abu Dhabi. Well, one night before Abu Dhabi. I'm losing track because the negotiation ran between 11:35 Moscow time and 4 a.m. Moscow time. One loses track of time. But basically what happened in that negotiation was that Witkoff, Kushner, and Gruenbaum for the first time comes to the Kremlin and meets President Putin, his national security advisor, so-called Yuri Ushakov, and Kirill Dmitriev, the business representative. Why is Gruenbaum there, and what does it mean? Gruenbaum, as I said, has a minor education in New York at a yeshiva, an Orthodox Jewish school. He gets a law degree in New York. He gets a business degree in New York, and then he becomes the salesman for distressed assets at KKR, that investment fund at Moelis and Company, another. That's his background. He's entered the Trump administration with a job associated with state procurement, but now he's very active on the Gaza settlement, as Arun has already mentioned, the Board of Peace deal, and he was promoted by the White House a few days ago as a figure leading, or at the staff level, operations of the Board of Peace control of Gaza. If that's not a distress asset in the terms that Gruenberg, Witkoff, and Kushner understand, I don't know what is. But they treat Gaza and Palestine as a distress asset from which they will make profit. And if one looks at the way in which they have operated, you can understand very well how they're going to do it. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that all indications are that at the Kremlin, and therefore onwards to Abu Dhabi, President Putin agreed to an American proposal for a swap. The swap is that in return for some US concessions on Russian terms for definition of the Donbass and the post-war territorial arrangements, lines and recognition, in return for the US concessions on security, pullback of heavy weapons, removal of NATO, etc., etc. And in return for business concessions, especially sanctions war and the sea war. I'll come back to that in a minute. In return for US promised concessions on those points, sometimes referred to as the understandings of Anchorage, Alaska, when President Putin met with President Trump in the last August. In return for US concessions, President Putin will accept the Board of Peace as the administrator of Gaza and accept that Russia would take a seat on the Board of Peace and pay the $1 billion so-called equity fee. President Putin has, and reflected by Uri Ushakov and the Russian press on Friday, have reflected that the Russian side says it's willing to contribute the $1 billion equity fee if the US releases or unfreezes some $5 to $6 to $7 billion worth of Russian assets frozen in the US. So it's a swap plus swap on that issue. But that's the link that's been drawn in Moscow by the US side and the Russian side. The second or third, depending how you count, element of the swap is Greenland. And President Putin announced prior to the arrival of Witkoff and Kushner and Grunbaum at the Kremlin, the night before, he announced that Russia is standing back, the same point made by Foreign Minister Lavrov, from the fighting between, or the apparent fighting between Denmark, the Europeans, the British, and the Americans over takeover of Greenland, will step back. And Putin said dramatically, I can reach for it, I'll read it to you because it's quite dramatic. As for Greenland, the president of Russia said, what is happening around Greenland does not concern us in any way. That's part of the swap. Of course, that's completely untrue. Greenland is the anchor of the new US strategy to cut Russia's Arctic routes off on the western side. We'll come back to the US plan to take the Canadian Arctic islands for the same purpose on the eastern side. We'll come back to that in a minute. But the Russian side, for the time being, is saying, we will accept, in principle, this 3-point swap. You, the Americans, can take Gaza. You can take Greenland. You must give us Ukraine that we have won, plus the parts of the Donbass that we haven't yet occupied, plus other conditions. That's the nature of the, let's say, in principle deal. Let's call it the three-way swap or the three-way switch, with each element of which is controversial inside Russia. And the Kremlin is particularly sensitive to criticism of the swap. So they did something that's rather unusual. They had a major editorial in a major security analysis platform in Moscow. Vzgyad is the name of the VZGLYAD, which is a major outlet for security analysis that's Kremlin supported. And it editorialized on Friday of what a clever arrangements these were. Now, that's not the end of the argument. I'm using it to tell you that it's a sensitivity measure to the amount of controversy that the swap elements cause inside Moscow. So that's the shape of things as we speak. The ability of the U.S. side to mobilize its Saudi-Pakistani alliance against the UAE-Russia-India alliance is a major shadow. It's two major elephants, which we'll talk about in a minute, in this particularly small Abu Dhabi China shop. Two elephants in one small China shop that tried to discuss Ukraine peace and all these other issues at the table. But at the table itself, the Americans inflicted an open-necked insult at the other sides, including the host. And that's indicative, in my view, of a confidence that's misplaced on the American side. A general who's lost so many battles on the Ukraine battlefield, no matter what his rank is, no matter that this is a highly distinguished fighter pilot who's never had combat in the air, that's not a man who can dictate a military outcome to the Russian side on the Ukraine battlefield. And that has lessons in India, which we can come to in a minute.
Yeah, that's all very interesting. The swap deals which you have discussed, or rather you put forth, and which is happening, right? Sahgal sir, do you think all this is feasible? Will it go through? Has it got any chance of going through? Can this whole settlement of Gaza and Ukraine and Greenland be done between just the Russians and the Americans and get away with it? Will it be forced on others? Are other actors and other nations in this globe irrelevant to these deals? These are the things which come to mind. And do you think these
absolutely.
forces of nature, which are intrinsic to Gaza, will die down? Because after all, Gaza, peace settlement, Palestine is not now. It's a centuries old problem. After all, we've seen a lot of things happening in this land. And what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, it defies a settlement for the past 3 years, and to swap it off against something else and come to a common platform and say, this is it, draw lines for each and say, we all live happily ever after. Is it going to happen? Your views.
Okay, so the bottom lines are as follows. First fundamental issue that we need to look at is that there is like John has very rightly pointed out, a huge amount of cockiness and self-belief in the United States administration, Trump and his chief negotiators, that they are controlling all the lines of further movement in almost all these directions. They are controlling the peace talks over Ukraine. They have an upper hand on negotiating on Greenland, and the Board of Peace Agreement is one which is going to be a new United Nations, which will bring peace to Gaza, development to Gaza, and also will be able to a much larger force of peace and tranquility globally. The the reality, however, is that all of these are basically fault lines. They are essential fault lines, and with each one of them having an inbuilt escalation factor, which the Americans, as usual, as is a norm with them, given by the experience of their past global interventions, are not taking into consideration. Let me look at if the talks fail on Abu Dhabi, what will going to happen? Already we see two interesting facets taking place. That is, Russia is currently continuing with its operations. There is no let's put the let up on their operations, and they are also doing a very interesting pressure campaign on the energy front, with Russians are striking Ukraine power grids during sub-zero temperature. These strikes are likely to intensify should the talks fail. The the issue that comes second issue is, having fought for 4 years and with NATO in the backdrop, and NATO trying to assert its influence in these peace talks, it's a no-go situation. It's an absolutely no-go situation, and it's unlikely that a modus vivendi could be sought. If you recollect, Zelensky had come up with a statement at Davos, where he was quite fed up with the way the Europeans are handling this whole issue of security guarantees and this thing, and he is now talking about aspects like creating a new small group of countries, mostly in Eastern Europeans, Poland, Hungary, and others. Not Poland, Hungary, but other Poland and other countries. I'm getting the name of the other countries he's talking about, who can provide an sort of an, a, a security coalition outside the European Union, because he believes that this kind of arrangement with UK and other NATO countries, uh, consensus is very difficult. So he's looking for a new kind of a localized security coalition. How much that is acceptable, I have no idea, which I think John can talk about. Then the issue which is most important is this board of peace pivot. Now Trump is, as usual, is trying to grandize this whole issue and trying to make a board of peace to dictate the terms of the agreement. And he might just say that the guarantees which you are looking for in Ukraine are going to be given not by the so-called United Nations or by this thing. It will be guaranteed by the board of peace. Basically, meaning is there will be a broader guarantees rather than from NATO or United States, but a larger set of governments who have joined the Board of Peace. And in this, very interesting elements are going to be the Pakistanis and the West Asian countries, as also the Gulf countries. So, uh, to me, this again is a no-go situation. The Board of Peace, I do not see there will be many takers. I don't think India is going to join Board of Peace in a hurry. India certainly doesn't want to spend $1 billion to have a photograph taken with General Asim Munir or Shehbaz Sharif uh, on the table. So this is also no-go situation. As far as the Greenland issue is concerned, and the antics of President Trump in trying to force a settlement on his terms in Greenland, uh, is all related to, of course, he rightly said that the Western Corridor and the Eastern Corridor, Arctic corridors. What we have to understand is that as far, and John knows it well, and you know it well, that the Arctic corridor provides an important transit routes for projection of maritime power by Russia, and also security of and a new sea line which provides a much shorter access to North America. There is no way that Russians and in collaboration the Chinese are going to allow this to be constrained by American power and influence. So therefore, they will watch the situation, they will look at the situation, they will see how much deployments can be done in Greenland, but eventually this is a flashpoint that could occur in I would say in maybe in occur in during Trump's tenure. His grandiose idea of a $185 billion Golden Dome, etc., also includes some of the Canadian territories. And now we are also, like John rightly said, that Canadians are becoming a pawn in this game. And Trump has categorically said that, by God, if you go allow the Chinese any access to goods tariffs, as well as what was nuance was also presence in this region, that's going to be your you know your neck will be cut. So bottom line is, there are large number of these issues are in the air. They are being negotiated under a premise that America holds all the cards. But the reality of the situation is, the other players are waiting and watching and seeing how far the Trump will go before they open their hand. And in this regard, both China and Russians seem to be taking a position of wait and watch and then see how to operate. I'm sure there is a huge amount of consultations, and I can see that reports indicate there are some consultations taking place between these players. But the failure of negotiations over Ukraine have huge amount of shocks for the global system, and that's going to be another chain shocks. Secondary sanctions of 500% or whatever is going to become more disruptive effort. Now the question is, the world is taking all these shocks in their stride so far, and we are now seeing for the first time some degree of resistance coming up in Europe. The How much that goes, how much that is possible, we don't know at this particular point in time. I cannot put my hand into it and say the European leaders will come again and fight this challenge of tariff challenge, or the uh, military challenge posed by Trump administration. But fact of the matter is, uh, in 6 months' time or 8 months' time, the cookie is going to crumble, and where everybody, I think, is also watching for the midterm elections and see how much do they impact President Trump and his standing in the United States. So I would say the ball is in the air. There are a lot of permutation and combinations being thought of. People who have the resources to contest American influence are waiting and watching. And the interesting part is, and that's the most interesting part from my perspective, is Ukraine, the Board of Peace in Abu Dhabi, not the Gaza and Greenland are getting all interconnected as one continuum of global disruption at this point in time. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. I think both of you brought out one important thing. And let me summarize it, the way things have panned out since that last time we spoke. In Venezuela, Trump and USA have got some degree of success. And that has fed them off to attempt this outrageous thing called the Board of Peace, Greenland and attempt a solution at the Ukraine problem simultaneously. And obviously, Trump has conflated all these three, and that's the way he's thinking and he's going forward. And like both of you actually have put it, uh, America is overconfident of its own capability to enforce a deal at its terms. Well, there are a lot of ifs and buts in this. The first if and the but is the fact that the board of peace is fine, but it is a Trump driven board. He is the boss of the whole show. It's not even the president of USA who's the boss. That's the way it has been framed. So I don't know whether many countries will opt for this. And at this point of time, it doesn't seem to be a great success unless America goes down to and gets at least Europe on its side. I don't think anyone is going to come. Even Mr. Putin joining this board of peace is conditional. China has not responded, India has not responded, nor have many other countries responded to this whole story, except for the West Asians who were there initially in Sharm el Sheikh 3 months back when this whole story was unveiled. And I'm very sure everyone is, if this board of peace was only confined to Gaza, things could have settled. But since he's opened them up as a global body which will supplant the UN, I don't think anyone will go for it. Even if people are prepared to pay $1 billion as executive fees or whatever you call it, or running expenditure fees, that's where we are. Now, Greenland, the way it has gone, I mean, let me put it and I'll uh, get views from both our panelists. Greenland was a done deal. He doesn't have to do all this to get deployment into Greenland. He could have one day deployed into Greenland under NATO and been done. But I think it's a bit of a megalomania on the part of Trump to say, look, I've acquired Greenland for USA. Especially the success in Venezuela has triggered it off. And this is where we are. And the swap which he's attempting, I think, is also a swap too far. Because a fundamental issue on which the swap rests, the ending of the Ukraine-Russia war rests, is in what can be done in Gaza. And Gaza is building castles in the air. Because at the end of the day, people, Palestinians, where are they going to get settled? Where is going to get moved out? You're going to use Pakistanis to shove them off. And if you think that this KSA is going to help settle all those 4+ million Palestinians somewhere else, I think it's a big ask. And we are talking of a land. We're talking of a people who fought through crusades through centuries. They have problems. It might not be, we might not, none of us, the world doesn't have an ideal solution. We have not had an ideal solution for them for the past century or more. And if this is going to happen, I don't think it's going to happen, but that's my personal view. But be that as it may, that's the historical context in which I'm putting certain things across. We need to see the fundamentals, assuming that, the Gaza thing comes to some settlement and that swap in Ukraine comes to some kind of outline settlement, though it is full of holes at this point of time. This is only this thing. We need to focus a little on Greenland and the Arctic routes and what it means. And how do you think the swap will go, or how do you think Greenland, which way it will go? And because that's one part of the globe where people don't understand much. I'd like John, your views on this, and of course, you can comment on whatever Brigadier Sahgal has said, or I've spoken, and you take it, and then we'll see where it goes. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Ravi. There's a lot that we all agree on, and a lot that each of us is asking each other to follow up on. So let me try and say a few things quickly, but and end on the point that I think you and our audience want to ask, because I see each of these, let's say, uncertain negotiating military problems as potential strategic threats to India, and strategic threats on which India and Russia combined represent a significant alliance going forward. But let me go to one of the issues that Arun raised. Why are we having the escalation of the electric war campaign from the General Staff against the Ukrainians now, and where does it lead? First, the electric war campaign began roughly October 2022. A series of raids were then conducted, but the Russian capacity to go on with the destruction of the electric power capacities of the country was suspended or restricted since 2022 by President Putin. The General Staff have had these plans on the table for years now. They are not a Russian novelty. Have a look at the way in which the United States bombed Serbia in 1999, attacking electric power, water pumping, water storage, bridges, and the capacity of the, let's say, Serbian industry and those who owned the industry who were around President Milosevic at the time. The attempt of the Americans at that time, I'm leaving aside the level of destruction wreaked on Korea, the level of destruction wreaked on Vietnam. Just since 1999, the Americans have pursued electric war campaigns. And arguably, they think they succeeded in forcing Milosevic to come to peace. The question is different from the Russian side, but the model of compelling a capitulation on terms is the American model. They also applied it after 1999 against Iraq, of course, in 2003. So there's nothing new, nothing especially Russian, no matter what the press has to say about the electric war campaign. What's novel is that President Putin restricted it in the hope that since October 2022, there'd be more concessions to negotiate than there have been. In fact, he had a unilateral moratorium on attacking energy infrastructure, which the Ukrainians refused to accept and which the Americans and the Ukrainians have violated by attacking energy infrastructure throughout the Russian hinterland, as we all know. Yeah. So what's happened here is that President Putin took his foot off of the brake. Now we have a position where the Russian side says each round of attacks are aimed at destroying the other side's capability of making war against our side, the Russian side. The Oreshnik attack was allegedly in retaliation for the US-Ukrainian drone attack on President Putin's residence and nuclear command bunker in the Novgorod region. These are so-called calibrated, symmetrical, tit-for-tat retaliations in relation to war planning, with the ultimate objective on President Putin's side of saying, we are trying to compel you to negotiate our terms. Neither the Americans, particularly General Grinkevich, nor the Ukrainians have essentially conceded or agreed. So the question arises on the Russian side, not exactly debated, but I'm giving it to you because it's obvious. At what point of this campaign will the Kiev regime capitulate? At what point will the losses on the front, then the land war, and the losses in the rear, in the electric campaign, at what point will the Ukrainians say enough is enough? Answer is very clear. The Europeans reinforce the answer. The Ukrainians will not give up. The Europeans are willing to go on fighting the war against Russia to the last Russian and the last Ukrainian. They are willing, and the Kiev regime is willing to fight and sacrifice more than 1,000 casualties every day on the land war. Second, they appear to be willing to accept immense civilian losses and citizen protests throughout the country, which are increasing, at the loss of electricity, the loss of heat, the loss of water and sanitation, because without electricity, you can't pump water, you can't make toilets work, you can't process sewage and the rest. If you can't do that, you begin to be overtaken by disease. All of these things have happened to India. You know the story. And many countries have suffered this, and the Americans have, or the British have inflicted it. So this is nothing new. That what's new here is that Russia has to say, we're inflicting more and more damage with European backing, German backing, French backing, British backing, and the US collecting money for supplying the wherewithal to continue the war. The Ukrainians won't give up. The Ukrainians won't come to terms. So there's a serious issue in Moscow. What will it take to compel capitulation? That's one point. And it's not clear, and we're not going to disclose military secrets if we knew them. The obvious political outcome is that the negotiations continue. And as you've said, what happens if they fail to reach an agreement? Well, because the Russian policy is we fight and we talk at the same time. Okay. So I'm responding there to an issue that Arun raised. What's the connection that you raised, Ravi, between all of these things plus the one other elephant? Let's call that the third elephant in this China shop, the impending attack on Iran again. Remember that we have a US fleet deployed in Eastern Mediterranean and moving into the Arabian Sea, not very far away from India, moving into place to launch massive attack on Iran after the failure of the internal rebellion that the US, the British, the Allies, and Israel, after the failure of that internal regime change operation has occurred over the last month. So we have the build-up against Iran. We have the operation with Greenland and Canada. And we have the so-called operation in Gaza. How do all these things come together from the Russian point of view and from everyone else's point of view? I'll have to speak quickly because we're short of time and these are big issues and there are big unknowns. First of all, from a Russian point of view, the priority is one war at a time. The Russian side has to reach a clear point at which the Kiev regime will capitulate on terms that assure that Russia will not have to continue fighting this war on this battlefield. At the same time, the Russians understand that the US and the NATO allies have no intention of ceasing fire, so to speak, on all fronts heading up to Greenland. Just bear in mind that Greenland is to be settled on the Cyprus model. This is the formula that the Dutch Secretary General of the UN, Mr. Rutte, came up with, that the Danes will accept. It's cheaper for the United States because they don't have to buy off the Greenlanders who won't count. The Cyprus model is the model the British enforced on Cyprus for independence, that it ceded territorial sovereignty over base areas. The Akrotiri and Dhekelia base areas in Cyprus are British. Go there and you'll see model British villages. They don't look at all like the Eastern Mediterranean. They're not part of Cyprus legally. They are British-operated bases, and that's what the US wants. It will own, as it were, these base territories in Greenland. As Arun said, one of the intentions is to place Golden Dome interception operations in Greenland. You can imagine all the other things they will do in these base areas, expanding what they already have, but in a much better protected autonomous position on Greenland, so they don't even have to ask for permission from NATO to operate there. The other part in the east that the Canadians haven't quite admitted yet is that when Trump insults Prime Minister Carney, when he imposes conditions, when he threatens to annex all of Canada as the 51st state, that's a softening up process. It's not megalomania. Of course, President Trump has his neurological deficits and psychiatric pathologies, but the logic, the reason of it is this: they're softening up Canada to give up the so-called Canadian islands in the Arctic, which constitute the base, with you add it to Alaska, Ellesmere Island for one. That's the Greenland equivalent in the west and Canadian equivalent in the east. What do you have when you put the two together? It's an attack on the Arctic route. And it's not just Russia and China that are directly threatened. India, too, is directly threatened, because in our previous discussions, we understand President Putin and Prime Minister Modi have discussed the cooperative ventures and the Indian Navy going as far north as Murmansk and the Arctic route. Why? Because obviously in Russian export of oil and other material to India can be choked off, as it's presently being threatened and choked off in the Mediterranean and elsewhere. Come back to that's the sea war. That India is threatened, as China is threatened, as Russia is threatened by this dual prospect of squeezing the Arctic route. Then, if I've got that right, and if you agree, the extension of American ambition to squeeze the trade routes for the future of the world, especially India, especially China, especially Russia, the next target's got to be the Malacca Straits. And India has a direct naval interest in keeping the Malacca Straits open, in keeping the Hormuz Straits open, in keeping the Red Sea open. And
absolutely.
We come back to, why are the Saudis fighting the Emiratis over Yemen? You said much of this, interestingly, in your program before this one with Sandeep. India is directly threatened by any attack, any form of attack on the so-called IMEC route. It therefore has particular interest in securing the Emirates, and we've seen the Indian Emirates defense MOU as an attempt to build the protection for that particular route from interference from the outside or internal terrorism or all the other things that damage a state's trade route, when a state like the United States sponsoring terrorism through states like Pakistan or states like the Ukraine aim to destroy the emergence of India as a superpower or China as a superpower. Now, what am I saying here? I'm saying you, India, have a strategic interest in preventing IMEC being disturbed. You have a strategic interest in protecting the north-south corridor, which Trump is already threatening to attack by building his armed Trump corridor, the Zangezur corridor, along the Armenia-Azerbaijan border, along the northern frontier of Iran. So you name the corridor on which India depends for exports and imports, and you find the United States working on building platforms to attack these corridors and to attack Russia Iran, India, China, and so on. So, if to put our audience in the bigger picture, each one of these small regional fights, so called Iran, Gaza, Greenland, Canada, threatens the entire way in which the world's trade routes work. The United States and Trump are attempting to dominate the terms of trade on these routes and dictate who can move what. Now, the sea lane, the war at sea, very recently involved a tanker called the Grinch. The Grinch, like Grinkevich, but the tanker, it was full of oil, was moving through international waters off between the coasts of Spain and the coasts of Algeria in the Western Mediterranean. It loaded its oil in Murmansk. It was flagged by the Comoros Islands, but we don't know exactly where it was heading. Suppose it was heading to India. It could have been heading towards unloading in India. It could have been heading towards Turkey. It could have been heading towards a storage position, floating storage position, while those who owned the oil negotiated who would buy it. But suppose what happened was the interception of a Russian oil cargo en route to India. What happened? The French took it into there with the US and British and NATO encouragement, took the initiative of first intercepting the vessel far away from France off the coast of Spain, determining that the documents on flagging and registration were suspect, and arrested the vessel and are taking it to Marseille. They haven't confiscated the cargo yet, but they will, much as President Trump showed how to do it by seizing the Marinera or the Mariner off the North Atlantic coast, off Scotland a few days ago. What do these incidents mean? They mean escalation of a sea war intended to disrupt and destroy not only the Russian ability to export, but the Chinese, the Indian, and everyone else's ability to import, and determine that the terms of trade will be enforced by the United States and NATO. These are the strategic threats, and the way the Ukraine battlefield platform is resolved in the coming weeks is a clue to the way the Pakistan platform against India will be resolved in the months and years to come.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. And I thought you put a lot of things in perspective. And I think we need to look at the Indian angle to this entire story, which is going on. Multi-layered story going on in many ways. Sahgal sir, your views on it, and I want our perspective on this whole story. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you. I go along with John on his mega perspective of how the Americans are trying to control the trade routes, dominate the trade routes, and how this will impact the global trade. I just want to highlight the perspective of India's position as far as Charbahar is concerned, because it fits into this whole project. As you are aware, the Charbahar is available to us till April 2026. In February, there's a meeting scheduled for between President Shankar and Rubio in DC on this whole issue. But India is not taking chances, and India has put in place what is called a strategic de-risking plan. Now, the strategic de-risking plan is called the of transfer management of transfer strategy. What is being done is that the operational footprints of Charbahar are being reduced, and more ownership and not ownership, but the working conditions are being taken over by the local Iranian manpower. This is being done in concert with the Iranians. The second issue which has been done is we had to pay $120 million as investment commitment to be done by 2026. India has done this in the January of this year. We have already transferred this amount, completing the contract early. The idea basically is to maintain the existing infrastructure and ensure that India remains committed. So there is no, as far as India is concerned, there is a very clarity in terms of our strategic thinking is the Charbahar, loss of Charbahar, and our here perspective is also directed against the Chinese, would mean the continuum of the Mekran coast going up to the Persian Gulf falling into the hands of the Chinese. We are aware of the fact that the Chinese are presence in Iran. They have a huge presence in Iran. They have huge oil commitments in Iran. They have a huge military commitments in Iran. A couple of days back, they supposedly brought in a huge amount of air defense systems and other missile systems to Iran to strengthen their defenses. And second issue is with Gwadar and Chabahar falling into the Chinese hand, as far as India is concerned, the western portion of the Indian Ocean region, from the Persian Gulf right up to Pakistan, would have a huge Chinese presence. This is hugely inimical to our interests. So when we look at the INSTCs and we look at the corridors from our perspective and maintaining a certain degree of ties with Iran, as part of Iranians' look east policy, it is important to understand that from Indian perspective, Chahar is more of a strategic asset to maintain presence and ensure the credibility of Indian presence in the region, and not to give an open space to a Sino-Pak collusion in this particular sector. The issue of the United States presence, as we rightly said, the carrier battle group from Indo-Pacific has already sailed here. They upgraded their whole posture. The whole idea basically is this: is that the Americans are keen to be prepared to undertake an Iranian attack should such a need arise. But we are also conscious of the fact is that the Gulf countries are putting a huge amount of pressure, including Saudi Arabia in this particular case, to prevent Americans from taking a foolhardy step, which could escalate the situation and leave the entire region burning. So, from the way I look at these things is that, well, Trump is trying to escalate issues, create huge amount of fire, light up huge amount of fires in this region, be it Gaza peace plan, be it redeployments into the region. The issue from Indian perspective is to work closely with the Russians at this particular juncture to ensure that the Chabahar and our relationship with Iran remains, and the new axis of IMEC, which you talked about, becomes a very big criticality for India. And as far as that criticality is concerned, we must work with Abu Dhabi and Israel. And there are, I believe, some talks on between us and the Israelis, in which the Abu Dhabi is also involved, to ensure that, come what may, We will not allow the Red Sea routes or the other routes, and the Persian Gulf become a place of unnecessary fighting or unnecessary instability, which will be inimical to all our interests. So there is, from Indian perspective, an important issue is to ensure the Charbahar remains an an important cog in our overall West Asian strategy or look West strategy, along with the IMAC, and to work towards this, uh, 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 both with the Chinese up to a point, Russians reasonably extensively, and also reach out to Americans through Israel that they should not take any precipitous steps which will bring this whole region into a flame created by the uh, in inappropriate actions by the Americans. So, from my perspective, the things are important. As far as the Arctic route is concerned, we have stakes in it. As we are all aware, as part of the RALOS, we have got access to 31 bases, and in Russia, particularly Murmansk and all these regions. But we will remain a smaller player. Our larger trade volumes will continue to be in from this, the Red Sea and the Suez and the Persian Gulf routes, and therefore that will be an area of our immediate focus. In 5 to 10 years down the line, when we have consolidated our positions and we have reasonable outreach capability, then these issues will become important for us. But as far as Malacca Strait concerned, or Americans or anybody trying to dominate the Malacca Strait, I can assure you, we have done some recent exercises. We are very clear in our mind that India has both the power potential and the capacity and the capability, which is increasing day in and day out, of ensuring the Malacca Strait remains open, secure, and no power in power other than who is trying to, destabilize this particular region can have success, even including the Chinese. The Chinese will also do not have the capacity at this particular point in time to be able to seize Malacca Strait from us. Or so that to that extent, I think India's position should be very clear to ensure the slocks of the Indian Ocean remain open, prevent inimical forces from trying to destabilize them, and also, towards this, work with both the Russians primarily, if required with the Chinese, to ensure that the American attempts to destabilize our region are contained. I'll stop here.
Thanks a lot, sir. I thought we had a terrific discussion. I'd like to tell everyone who's watching this. Let me summarize what we have gone through from an Indian perspective, so that things fall in place. Lest you think, look, John has spoken something, Brigadier Sahgal has spoken something. Where's the link? The link, as I look at rests here in India, how we view all these developments. What is it that we are facing? Right? Let me start from internally. We know that this is the time for India to grow the next 2 decades. We're going to keep growing. Our demographics are good, our education is good, everything is good, and no one can stop us. Right? We also know that, look, we've come to a point in time in the Indian history where we have to go into a route which is neither Chinese nor American. Right? While we have, these are two of our biggest trading partners, but our future lies in seeing how we can get away from both of them. Each have their challenges. We've heard what are the challenges which America is posing to us. Whatever happens in Gaza, whatever happens in Greenland, whatever happens in Russia, between Russia and Ukraine, right? And whatever happens between Russia and USA, right? And whatever the deals which come out of this triangle, which are being conflicted, affects us. and it affects us adversely. For the simple reason, if there's one thing which China and USA agree on, it is that India should not be allowed to grow beyond a point. Right? I can go over it over a couple of hours, but that's not the thing. But we'll take it as a given fact. Right? The Chinese and the Americans both have a vested interest in promoting Pakistan against India, and they've been doing it very blatantly. The latest manifestation of this is in Bangladesh, which is ongoing, about which just today morning I've done a live podcast. So when you look at it, as India grows, you'll have both our flanks being supported by America and China, right? In a combined manner, a disaggregated manner, linked together by Pakistan threatening us. That's our immediate threat. Go a little further, whether it's the Red Sea routes, the INSTC, the IMEC, or the Arctic routes, you see the international play coming into thing, and it's going to affect us. And we have the latent capability to put certain things in place, but overall, we don't have the equity there to take it beyond a point. And this is where we will need USA at some point of time, and at many points of time, we don't need them. So whether we are going to join the Board of Peace or not is a big question mark. And for that, Europe comes into play. And how the India-Europe deal goes through, the FTA and the security deal goes through, has a lot to do with the outcomes with USA in future. But that's a thing. Now coming to Russia. The thing with Russia is Russia and India have a lot of common interests. But at the same time, I think we in India have to be aware that look, Russia is dealing with USA on for its own issues. The fact that there's a swap arrangement being spoken of between President Trump and President Putin in some form or the other looks at that whole story. At the same time, Russia has to continue dealing with China, and it is dealing with China through China in a very funny way that it is assisting Pakistan to start selling, fighter aircraft, which will feed into the KSA with KSA and Turkey, the unholy triangle being formed, which ultimately it supports USA. So I don't know how Russia is going to play this game out, but Russia has to do some introspection. So do we have to do introspection if this story goes forward? Because that is something which is Russia has to take a call whether it wants to give fighter aircraft engines to Pakistan or not. So I think we are in a state of flux. What we have heard from both John Helmer and Brig Arun Sahgal is that this flux, which has got unfolded ever since Venezuela, the attack on Venezuela, is going to continue. And in all this flux, there is one thing which is going to happen immediately next to us is whatever is happening in Iran. So what is going to happen in Iran is definitely going to have a bearing on many things. And the outcomes of that are, at this point of time, we even don't know. We don't know how Iran is going to fall and which way it's going to fall. The fact that it is going to fall is almost foregone. Many for internal reasons and many for external reasons. But which way it is going to fall, we don't know. When it falls, how the cards will fall, how it's going to affect each of these things is a matter of to see how it falls, right? That's what the whole story is. For India, we are living in very uncertain times. We are living in a time of opportunity for India, but equally there's a whole lot of problems around. Whether our own polity will make use of this chaos, because in every chaos there's an opportunity to go ahead, is to be seen. Right. With this, before I conclude, final concluding remarks for a minute or so from John and from Brigadier Sahgal, and then we'll say thank you. John, over to you.
I think all I can do is agree with both of you to assure our audience that this is so important. We'll come back to these topics over and over again. And finally, President Trump is doing India the great compliment of acknowledging that India will be a superpower and must be prevented at all costs by the United States of, as you said, Ravi, growing too far, too fast, too powerfully. That's a compliment to the future of India that Trump, a perverse compliment, yes, that he's paying. And it has to be understood strategically. Therefore, India is obliged to think like a superpower, even right now. And each of these issues, therefore, impact on the ability of India to go into its future and to deter India's adversaries, starting with Trump, who's paying the perverse compliment. How to deter him, as you've just pointed out, Ravi, and as Arun has pointed out, on each of these battlefields, there's an Indian interest. How to deter the Americans and give Trump the understanding that if you proceed, you will be defeated. Trump doesn't make moves into those battlefields. He runs away from them. Therefore, thinking like a superpower, as he wishes to prevent you from thinking, requires deterring. It requires all sorts of things that we don't have time for now. But that would be my concluding 60 seconds.
Thanks a lot. Sahgal sir.
Yeah, I just want to, very complimentary remarks by John, but just to put a reality picture in place, what India is facing, like in this operational scenario, a multi domain warfare, we are now faced with a multi domain geopolitical contest. And that's something which we need to be concerned about. It's not only politics, diplomacy, it's trade wars, it's areas of influence, it's security of important assets, security of sea lines of communications, etc. And therefore, India has to do a multi-pronged strategy to deal with the multi-domain geopolitical situation. India has to develop a multi-domain strategy, and that strategy is develop credible economic power, develop credible technological power, fast track your programs, and last and most importantly is develop geopolitical leverages. You cannot be a multi domain, you cannot be a multi geopolitical multi domain player if you do not have these capacities and capabilities. While everybody looks at India as a powerful nation, emerging powerhouse, India has to do itself an own favor, and India has to look at its own credible capabilities to develop and evolve into a major geopolitical power with adequate assets which it can leverage on the global scale. That's all I'd like to say.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot to both of you for your wonderful comments, interventions, and ideas. Diverse. We've gone across a whole range of issues. So from what we have spoken so far, the world is in chaos beginning 2026. But in this chaos, I see a great opportunity for India. The great opportunity for India is that Mr. Trump and his cohorts have unleashed something I don't think they are able to control, and they will not control. And that will give a whole lot of opportunity for India, and India can't be stopped. On the other hand, China is unleashing its own chaos internally. Because if you see, just yesterday evening, they have taken out their top military under Zhang Yuxia, and their central military commission is virtually defunct, and there's a whole lot of political chaos internally in CCP. And with their other problems, we get this opportunity. So while they will know there'll not be direct threat on India, I don't see it happening. What we have to contend is the indirect threats. And for indirect threats, India has sufficient equities in terms of its own strength internally. Second, we have trusted friends in Russia. We've got trusted friends in the Middle East who are now showing up. And as also go to Japan, which has been our long-term friend, silent, but it is there. And over the horizon, if you see, you look at Brazil and places like that where things are coming up. So I think we have opportunities as much as there are threats. And I'll conclude by saying I see more opportunities than threats as India progresses. With this, thanks a lot to both of you. So great to have you. I've taken so much of your time, but I'm sure our audience would have enjoyed it. Thank you and wish you a very good morning or evening wherever you are.
Happy Republic Day to everybody tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.